Very good points, Brent. I really like that about how you pointed out that that's Satan's plan. He really does that to us a lot, where he says, this is what your enemy is doing, but it's really what he's doing. I really like that point. So, for my study for chapter 16, what stuck out to me personally when I was reading the chapter last night was how it said they murmured against the Lord, how Lehi murmured against the Lord, and you're just kind of like, don't you know that you're not supposed to do that? Like, that's a big deal, you know, kind of like, I don't know, not like just, I don't know. Anyways, like, I'm just like, oh, Lehi the prophet was murmuring against the Lord. Yeah, he got chastened, but like, you know, do I ever murmur against the Lord? Like, why me, God? Why me? Ugh, why are you doing this to me? Type thing. So I suppose that's what it is. But in the Come Follow Me, what I really liked that they put in, most of what's happening in the Come Follow Me doesn't really like help me with my study because it's very basic. Like, maybe it would help you to make a chart, and I'm like, that's not my kind of study. But this one thing really helped me. It said, if you ever wonder why bad things happen to good people like Nephi and his family, you may find insights in these chapters. But perhaps more important, you will see what good people do when bad things happen. And I thought that was a very valid or good point to make, that, you know, a lot of people who aren't members of the church who I've talked to before, they're like, well, why would God allow death and sorrow and all these things? And it's like, that's not what you should be looking for. You should be looking for, what do good people do when these things happen to them? You know, it's not, today everybody wants to blame somebody else instead of looking to their own self and their own character and being like, okay, how am I going to react to this? What am I going to do about this? You know, it's like people want to be acted upon constantly instead of having action, I suppose you would say. But another thing that I learned through my study this morning is he gave a lot of evidence in the study this morning for the hunting weapons, the bows and the arrows, the stones and the slings, and the route that they took. But one thing that was very interesting that he said about the bows and the arrows is that bows were symbols of political power. One thinks of Odysseus bending the bow to prove himself. An overlord would break a bow of a disobedient vessel to symbolically put the rebel in his place. In that detail is significant in 1 Nephi 16. Nephi breaks his bow, and the bows of Laman and Lemuel lost their spring. But when Nephi fashions a new bow, making him the only one in the camp with a bow, his brothers soon accused Nephi of having political power. So I found that very interesting. Like, it goes from like they're all hunting and he breaks his bow, and then they're like, he wants to be a king over us, and you're like, where did that come from, Laman and Lemuel? Like, whoa, that's like jumping the gun. But here it explains that bows were a sign of political power, so that's where it comes from, and that's kind of where their distrust starts to take place. It also talks about the place where Nephi broke his bow. So, like, they're talking about the route that they've taken, and it says, furthermore, ancient Arab writers claimed that the only wood suitable for creating a bow was the nab wood, N-A-B, which grew solely in the region where Nephi broke his bow. As Hugh Nibley states, how many factors must be correctly conceived and correlated to make the apparent simple story of Nephi's bow ring true? The high mountain near the Red Sea, at a considerable journey down the coast, the game on the peaks, hunting with a bow and sling, finding of bow wood, viewed as something of a miracle by the party. What are the chances of reproducing such a situation by mere guesswork. And so it basically says, how in the world would Joseph Smith know that that is where they were? That is where they would find the perfect wood to make a bow. On the mountain is where they would find game. You know, it's just saying. And one other thing. Okay, so it talks about how Nephi says, and I made an arrow out of a straight stick, which kind of seems strange, but also not so strange at the same moment. Like, he makes a bow, he's got to make arrows. But if you think about it, he had arrows from his metal bow. He didn't say that the arrows were damaged, just that his metal bow broke. Well, it talks about how arrows meant for a metal bow would be way too heavy for a wood bow, and so you couldn't use them. It would be it says it would be shooting. The arrows from a steel bow would, when shot from the wooden bow, would be like shooting telephone poles. And there's no way that Joseph Smith would know that, because archery was like passe by that time and nobody did it. And they all had guns, so why would you use bows and arrows? So he wouldn't know anything about it. And it was just really cool to see that, like, yeah, he had to fashion a bow out of that wood and also an arrow out of that wood so that it would be perfect. Bow archery has to be perfect. So I thought that was all some really good stuff that I learned today. And thank you for your comments. And I don't know about the second spindle, but in reading this, it talks about the writing on the ball and the Leahona, and they said it was held in your hand, but it produced great things. And he relates that to the scriptures. They're small enough to hold in our hand, but they have these miraculous things inside them. And so maybe the second spindle was for writing. I don't know. But, I mean, where else would the writing be? I'm not quite sure. Anyways, some thoughts. Anyways.